Hey everyone, this is Logan with Hazeltine LLC. I'm super excited because we got an extremely famous persona here, Chris Kirkpatrick, of Life 180, coming to us from the
Hey, man.
Dominican Republic. Chris, how you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. Great
Awesome.
to have you on the show. Really
Thanks, man.
appreciate it.
It's good to be here.
Okay, so today I'm doing something a little bit different, and I do want your feedback on this. So if you want to shoot me a note directly or put something in the comments, is this helpful or not? Because I'm not going to be talking about the infinite banking concept too much today. I'm going to be talking about my own personal story, which I typically don't like sharing. I'm typically not that kind of person, but I wanted to talk about it for a number of reasons. First of all, it does build some trust, some sympathy. Secondly, it's actually quite relevant to what I do, as you'll see later, maybe not directly in an obvious way. I also want people to realize sometimes when you see people like Chris Kirkpatrick and Denzel Rodriguez and myself on YouTube, we can appear like we're supermen and we just got it all figured out and we just know what's going on. That's not reality. We all have our struggles. We're all human beings. We all have original sin. And I think the difference oftentimes between the successful people and the unsuccessful people is just perseverance, right?
Mhm.
They don't have they have the same weaknesses that you do. Chris and I have the same emotional problems everybody does. Maybe everyone's a little different, but none of us are supermen, right? And I
We
think the
all have
more we
our own
can,
challenges.
yeah, and the more we can be brutally honest about that
Yep.
with ourselves and just persevere, the more we can actually address it rather than behaving like we're supermen, right? As Chris would say, life does not exist on a spreadsheet, right?
Truth.
So the other reason is when I do share this story with clients, some clients and prospects, I actually get a lot of very positive feedback. And almost everybody has a similar story,
Mm.
similar story. And I think you can tell by the title of this video, obviously it is medical related. We're talking about navigating the medical cartel. And there's kind of two parts to the story. And I think a lot of people have similar stories. One part is just dealing with your own health challenges,
Mm.
which is its own thing. And then there's dealing with the medical cartel, which is a whole nother challenge on top of it that it's hard for people to appreciate. If you haven't been through it yourself or had a family member go through it, it's really hard to appreciate how big of a challenge that is, even on its own, right?
Mm.
If you just had to navigate your own health challenges, that's bad enough, right? That's hard enough. But now you've got this whole bureaucracy, cartel, whatever you want to call them, that let's just say doesn't have your necessarily have your best interest at heart that you have to navigate to try and get help,
Mm.
right? And I hope I can give some practical advice to people because I know there are a lot of people out there who have similar situations. And I know Chris maybe has also had some similar situations as well. I think it's shocking to me the number of people that have similar stories where they'll
Yeah.
say, "Yeah, they killed my father. Yeah, they killed my father-in-law." Right, all the stuff that they do. Right, and the last thing I'll say is this is why I always emphasize your insurability is an asset and it
Mm.
needs to be protected just like any other asset. Okay. So that means you need to own your insurance policies, not rent them from someone else, like, say, an employer. So when you have life insurance, you need to have at least convertible term life insurance with a company that has a competitive whole life product. That way, no matter what happens to your health, you still have the guaranteed right to convert it and turn it into permanent. Okay. Ideally, you'll eventually have whole life insurance.
Yeah.
Eventually, that may not be feasible from day one. But the same thing applies to, let's say, disability, right? You can get a non cancelable individually owned disability policy, which means no matter what happens to your health, you can keep that policy in force and you can add more with no underwrite, right? So you can stay protected through your whole working life. Critical illness, right? Same thing. You can get a policy that's guaranteed renewable for life. So again, no matter what happens to your health, you own that policy. You're not renting it from somebody else and you're protecting your insurability. So if you have policies from an employer, okay, that good. I'm glad you have that. And that is certainly protecting you in some way, but it's not protecting your insurability, right? What happens when you leave them? What happens when your employer decides to stop offering that? Because they're under no obligation to keep offering it to you. And how many people have even really looked through the fine print of what the limitation of that policy is? I'm blessed to have partners have 38 years of experience doing disability, critical illness, long-term care. And
Mm,
I always offer to my clients, hey, send me your employer provided policies. They'll review them for you. And most people have never had that, they don't
mm,
even understand the coverage that they have. At least you'll be armed with more information, whatever you decided.
yeah.
With that having been said, I want to tell a little bit about my health journey, if you will. And it's really hard to know where to begin, but I've been struggling with very mysterious chronic health issues since probably 2010, 2011, even further back. If you probably go back to 2007. Um, but part of the challenge is a lot of it still remains mysterious. So if you are someone out there who is struggling with chronic and very mysterious health issues that haven't been diagnosed, that's kind of where I'm at. So and up until 2022, maybe it remained very mysterious, completely undiagnosed, a lot of different things going on. I found that the MDs, the doctors in general, are very locked into their box, right? You meet with them. If your condition happens to fit into their box, they can help. If it doesn't, there's really absolutely nothing they can do for you. And one of the main characteristics of the modern doctor seems to be that they are required to have a little compassion for their patients. The cold clinical way in which is horrifying to me, right? There's just no sympathy, no compassion for the patient whatsoever, right? There's no human element to it, right? And they're oftentimes dealing with people who struggling with pretty serious challenges, and they seem to just have zero sympathy, even if they can help you, right? They just treat you like your cattle. So what they'll usually do is when you come in, their process makes sure that the doctor doesn't actually have to do any thinking or any diagnosing. What they do is they hook you up to a machine or they do blood work or something like that, right? And then the doctor doesn't even run the test or look at the results. He just reads them, right? And say, oh, your blood work says you have this, or the x-ray, the MRI says you have this, that, or the other thing, right? And that's all they have. There's no, let me actually listen to the patient and let me actually try and figure out what's going on. And let me actually try and figure out what the root cause of this is, right? No, it's more just about managing symptoms, right? So I had a lot of stuff going on. And then in April of 2020, I suffered a nearly fatal heart attack, kind of out of the blue. I almost died. They actually told me that. And if they tell you that, you know it's pretty serious because normally they don't tell you that, right? They told me it was a pretty close shave. I almost died. So I was very young and I had all sorts of issues I was struggling with, but nothing that would kill me, right? That would lead to a nearly fatal heart attack. And from then on, I'm continuing to see these doctors and still no progress, no diagnosis, right? No explanation as to what actually could have caused this. And by the way, I still have no explanation on that. So it's not like I don't want to act like I've figured it out
uh,
in the past. No, this is something I still deal with on a day-to-day basis. What I have found to be helpful is working with alternative providers like acupuncturists, like naturopaths. Okay.
uh,
And they are a mixed bag. They're not like saviors. They're not the end all be all. But the main difference is this. If you're someone who's struggling navigating medical cartel, I would recommend that you meet with someone who does not take insurance. So it doesn't even have to be a naturopathic doctor necessarily, right? And the reason why I say that is health insurance is not really insurance. Okay. It's not at all. I worked in the insurance industry. So health insurance gives insurance a bad name. And this is why one of the reasons why people understandably have an incredibly negative view of insurance. I can understand. I mean, what the health insurance cartel does is horrible.
mm,
They're not real insurance. And how can you tell they're not real insurance? They don't underwrite you. If you want to apply for a life insurance policy, you're going to have to go through underwriting. And if they find out you have cancer, they're not giving you a policy, right? Whereas the health insurance is stuff without underwriting and it covers quote unquote exclusively everything, right? That's not insurance. So the challenge is if the doctor takes insurance, what that means is the doctor really works for the insurance company and not for you.
mm,
Most doctors, and I'm not going to call them professionals, but most doctors are basically overpaid bureaucrats who work for the insurance company, right? The question, so one of the things that the white coat investor says, and I'm not a fan of him, but I did like this when he was talking about one of the things you should investigate is how is your financial advisor being paid? Like, how is he making money? I'm like, that's actually a
Mhm.
good question, right? So apply that same logic to the medical profession, right?
Yep.
Who's actually paying the doctor? Like, how is he making his money? Well, the patients are paid. So he doesn't really work for the patients, does he? It's the insurance companies, the drug companies, and the government, right? That's who's paying their bills. That's who they work. It's not to say they're evil people. It's not to say they can't help you. I've found some good doctors and I've definitely gotten some good help through the standard medical system. It's just important to keep that in mind, right? Um, how many people even bother to get a second opinion, right? When the doctor tells them something.
A lot
So
of
I
times
would
won't
recommend,
allow them to get a second opinion. They won't,
yeah,
insurance won't pay for a second opinion.
correct, correct. So I would recommend talking to a naturopathic doctor, talking to, again, someone who does not take insurance. Where when I started working with a naturopathic doctor, and I've worked with them before, and they're a mixed bag. Some are not so great, some are great. It's kind of in between. This particular natural doctor, I'll say her name because I'm going to talk positive about her, Dr. Sarah Giardenelli of the Collective Health Center. She does this thing that a lot of doctors, in fact, no doctors seem to do. She actually does research, right? And so more than once, this doctor who's not an MD and the medical cartel does not recognize her as a doctor is lecturing the doctors on their own supposed specialty because she actually bothered to do the research. And the doctor who's supposedly an expert isn't doing any research, right? What is the skill of the modern doctor? It's not helping patients. The skill of the modern doctor is knowing how to navigate the insurance bureaucracy in order to get paid, right? So they look at you and they look at the symptoms you have, the blood work results, and they say, what's the most expensive procedure that insurance will cover and how can I get them to cover it? Right. Now they don't all think this way, but the point being, that's their skill, right? It's a whole other skill navigating health insurance to get paid, right? And I've had good doctors tell me more than once. They say, look, I'm telling you, you have X. That's what you have. But I have to report it to the insurance company as why, because if I don't, they're not going to cover it. So I'm just telling you this symptom I'm reporting to the insurance company is a lie. That's not what you have. But that's how I'm going to get them to cover it, right? They know how to navigate that, right?
That's tough, man. I would say this for me, the challenge is the system as it is, whether we're talking the financial system, whether we're talking the medical bureaucratic system and the cartel, the banking cartel, the medical cartel, whatever. That sounds extreme to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, the way I look at it is when a system inherently builds in moral hazards into their business model, that makes it so good people are going to constantly be at conflict with their own morals and their own value structure, right? That's a problem. And that's where we are. That's where we are. And I think going high level on this, because I think it's important. You said something earlier that I actually disagreed with. You said what you're going to talk about is not related to what you actually do. I would say there's probably not much more that's related to what you do. Like we're talking about guaranteeing a result. We're talking about control. We're talking about control of the results in our life. I think a lot of times with infinite banking, we talk about taking control of the banking function of our life. Okay, that's fine. But no, you're taking control of the entire spectrum of your life. Because if you do it the right way, you're going to have all these additional benefits in the policy that maybe you might be buying it because you hate the banking cartel and you don't know what you don't know about the medical cartel because you've never had a problem with it and it's not top of mind. It's not at the forefront of your thought. And so you haven't dealt with it. But like you're solving two problems with one product, right?
Oh,
And
more
I
than
think
two.
you
You're solving a
yeah, yeah,
lot.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You're solving a lot more than two problems. But and I think a lot of this is because these participating mutually held life insurance companies have been around since before the medical institutions as we know them today, the banking institutions as we know them today. Whole life insurance companies predate these companies by decades. And it's not just little. So these are strategies that are like their products that are there that are protected And from a legal and taxation perspective, and they're protected there to make sure that they'll never change, and you'll always have those benefits. And you have the ability. I always say this is like the number one reason people are struggling with money, the number one reason people struggle with their health is their money is not in alignment with their values and beliefs. And I'm not saying I don't like to tell people what's right or what's wrong. That's just not my style. But I do speak very boldly and very critically about the fact that most people just don't think enough about what they want. And I think if people think intentionally about what they want and what their values, what their beliefs are, and I think if you role play some scenarios out and you go, all right, what would happen if I were to get cancer? What would happen if I were diagnosed with something that they couldn't figure out? And I got news for you. This happens all the time, all like every day. Logan's story is not like this isolated incident. It's happened to my father-in-law. It's happened to my wife. It's happened to my mom. I've got three of the closest people in my life that it's happened to. Right. So I wanted, before you went too far, I wanted to like kind of address what you talked about before. I really want to be support here for you, but like that level of it is like, this is as relevant to everything you do because, or it is relevant to what you do to help people with infinite banking as the cash value is, as everything else is, because this is the backstop to protecting your wealth. Because guess what? You could be the most successful person in the world, build up a Warren Buffett type. Maybe if you built that big, you'd be okay. But if you could build up a $20 million fortune, and then guess what? If you don't have enough assets in place and you're designed the way that leaves you exposed financially, and then you get sick, and then with cancer or another alternative thing, like I met a guy the other day, I can't remember. It's like he had this disease, I can't even pronounce it, and he's actually in the insurance business, but he spent $2.4 million traveling the world of his own capital. He was a really successful business guy, but he had to start over from scratch after that. He solved his problems, ironically, with wicked alternative treatments out in India and the Middle East and all that stuff. He got healthy when he was literally dead man walking in the United States. And if he followed the pharmaceutical way, he would have been dead man walking. But he spent his fortune to live, and now he's 57 years old and he's starting over.
Yep, I've heard stories like that. The number one reason people declare bankruptcy is for medical issues. And these people, many of them had good health insurance.
Hmm.
So that's another lesson learned is okay, if you have good health insurance, let's say that you bought or through an employer, okay, I mean, good. It's good you have that, but don't
But
think it's going to protect you because it's not real insurance. It's not real insurance. We can talk about other forms of real insurance if you want to schedule time with Chris or
mm,
me. There are other ways you can actually protect yourself that are way more flexible that are not going to limit you by the insurance company's arbitrary rules as to what they consider acceptable or not acceptable treatment.
before you go further, I want to say one thing. I want to say one of the biggest things that I think people need to contemplate as you're watching and listening to this. I think it's really important to understand like a core value, right? Because I believe like I said, your money has to be aligned with your values and beliefs, right? So in order to do that, you have to really truly understand what your core values are, right? And so while Logan and I are probably way different people in how we live our daily life, like whatever, I guarantee you one of our core values, and I haven't talked to him about this, right? We haven't talked about this at all, but I guarantee you one of our core values is control. Like I want to have a certain level of control over the results of my life, and I want to set myself up to be in control and not dependent, not reliant on anybody else. Now, that takes time to actually get to that place where you have that control and freedom. But when you have insurance through health, the medical cartel, as Logan would put it, or the health insurance companies as they exist in the United States or probably most other places, you don't have control of your health directive, of your medical directive, of the treatments that you're going to see. So you're not really in control of those things. So if you want to have control, then you need to think outside the box because living inside the box basically makes you a slave to the system and forces you to be reactive and to lose your dignity and sit in a medical room. And I know I've been there in the last couple of years watching some of the closest people that I know go through this, have these people sit in a room with you, tell you, listen, there's nothing we can do for you. You're going to die in the next 90 days. and maybe we can stretch it to 6 months to a year, but your quality of life's going to suck because this is what it is. And they don't even look at the other things. And guess what? That person's still alive 4 years later because we sought alternative treatments. And were there guarantees behind the alternative treatments? No. Have there been people that have done the alternative treatments and died? Yes. Okay, that's fine. But we had control. And whether he lived or died, I'm talking about my father in law, whether he lived or died, he made a conscious decision and he had control of the decision he made. He didn't have to lose dignity and just kind of like fall in and be like, all right, I guess I have no choice. I'm just going to go do this. You know what I mean? And I think from a spiritual perspective and from like a being and an energy perspective, there's a lot to be said for the fact that when you have the empowerment and the ability to be empowered to go actually seek answers and not just have to show up and be like, all right, what are you going to do for me? That gives you more of a chance to live, more of a chance to fight. And that fight is so tied into the percentages of success.
Yeah, there is a massive psychological component to it as well. That's
Yeah.
hard to appreciate before you've actually been through it or seen someone close to you go
Mm,
through it. And that is probably the number one lesson I've learned from this is you
yeah.
will not be in a good mental or emotional state to make good decisions. I've been struggling for years and I know I'm making suboptimal decisions, but there's nothing I can do about it because of the way that my health issues affect me. I'm just not, I don't have full mental capacity. I don't have full emotional capacity. And dealing with your health issues might take up 10 to 20% of your time. It'll take up 120% of your emotional energy. Like you will be drained all the time,
Yeah.
physically, emotionally, all that stuff. Right.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to be prepared. And yeah, to feel like you're in, I would say you're never going to be fully in control, but to the degree possible, right? That you're going to have options, right? People who have never been through this, um, don't understand how much the financial aspect comes into it. It's sort of like, you hear about a lot of marriages end in divorce due to financial problems. It's not that the finances are necessarily the problem, but that's the thing that's right in your face every day that you cannot ignore, right?
Hmm.
It's the same thing when you go through these health issues. Like the thing that's right in your face that you can't ignore is, well, how am I going to pay for this? What am I going to do? You're afraid to even go into a doctor's office or hospital because you might get a $20,000 bill. So just knowing that you have options um, is huge. And I would say it in health insurance won't protect you, right? Of course. I mean, again,
Right.
I'm not saying don't have health insurance. Actually,
Sure.
there are alternatives we'll get to in a second, but because I want this to be positive in the sense that there actually are great alternatives. It's just like when you discover the infinite banking concept, when you discover the other ways you can protect yourself, it's very liberating because you realize, oh, okay, I don't have to just do what the medical cartel tells me. I don't have to rely on my crummy health insurance plan. There are options that are reasonable. And if I set them up in advance, then I'll be ready when it does happen. Right. But I want people to think about this. Let's imagine you take your car's not working. You take it to a mechanic. Okay. And then he works on it. He charges you $1,000 and you go out to your car and your car won't start. Right. Well,
Hmm.
you're going to go back to the mechanic and say, hey, fix it. And he says,
Yeah.
okay, that'll be another $1,000. You're like, wait a minute. No, fix it. You did not fix it. Fix it.
Yeah.
I'm not paying you until it's actually fixed. Right. Well, now let's apply that to the medical system. What if we paid the doctors based on results? This is the way that everything works in every reasonably free market institution. It's based on results, right? What if we actually applied that to the medical system? We're not dysfunctional, right? It would be like, hey, Mr. Doctor, I'm going to pay you based on the results that I get. So if you help me get healthy, great. I'm happy to pay you. You're worth your weight in gold. Absolutely. So what happens
Hmm.
is you go to the doctor, pay him a bunch of money, and you don't get better. Maybe you even get worse and it just drags on for years. And you keep paying them and paying them and paying them and paying them. The only way it works is because of the health so-called insurance, right? They're the one dishing out all the money, not you, the patient. You couldn't afford it. So what happens is the cost, these absurd costs get socialized, right? So we as a society bear them the same way we as a society bear it, right?
Yeah.
And that's what happens, right? I had a doctor, I was supposed to get some blood work done. They did the wrong thing. I had to go and do it again. Guess what? They still got paid by the insurance company, even though they didn't do what they were supposed to do, right? They still got paid. It doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter what the results are. In no other situation will we accept this, right? Except in this
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
we're kind of forced to, right? kind of forced to. If it works properly, we would pay doctors based on results, right?
Mm,
Uh, So, and then to return to my situation a little bit,
yeah.
I'm trying to decide what details are important because this is going to
What
come out in
direction
a
to go?
jumbled emotional mess, right? I don't want to pretend like I'm a
I,
Superman.
I,
I'm not. This is a tough thing. It's a tough thing to go through, right?
yeah.
Um, so what happened was I had been diagnosed with sleep apnea back in like 2016. So I still have lots of mysteries. I'm still dealing with this today, but some of the mysteries have been resolved, and I want to share how that happened. So hopefully people can learn from this, and maybe people have similar issues, because people being diagnosed with sleep issues is not unusual these days. I was diagnosed with sleep. And by the way, sleep apnea is kind of like type 2 diabetes. It's not a real diagnosis at all. When you go to see a sleep doctor, you need to understand you are not talking to a sleep doctor. You are talking to a CPAP salesman. His job is to sell you CPAP, and he will give you a CPAP machine from the device manufacturer that gives him kickbacks. Most people don't even realize you can actually go like shop around for CPAP machines, right? And there are lots of different ones with different options, but your doctor isn't even going to tell you that. He's just going to give you the one that pays him the most. Done. And sleep apnea is just an excuse to sell you CPAP because it's not a real diagnosis. When you do the sleep study, all it really measures is your breathing, right? And it's telling you you have some sort of breathing issue while you're sleeping. Okay, well, the logical question anyone would ask is, well, what's causing that breathing issue, right? But this question is never even asked, let alone answered by most doctors because that's not their job. Their job is not to figure out what's fix it because you know what? Then they lose their revenue. Their job is just to manage your symptoms. So they keep you coming back, right? They keep you on that
Yeah.
CPAP. They keep you on that metformin for type 2 diabetes, whatever it is, right? And I've had them tell me this, not in so many words, but they're basically saying, we're just going to manage your symptoms, right? I'm like, how about fixing the problem? That no, all of their well, not all, but a lot of their so-called diagnoses just tell you what your symptoms are, right? Like sleep apnea and type 2 diabetes. That just tells you what your symptoms are. You have high blood sugar. You have the nox, you have a breathing issue while you sleep, right? So I struggled with CPAP, and I know many people have. By the way, the success rate of CPAP is shockingly low. It's shockingly low, but they don't tell you that, right?
Mm,
They don't tell you that, right? Again, in any other relatively free market area, you would be able to see what's the success rate, right? Like, how is this working? What are the results? Well, no, you can't see that. They won't tell you. And in fact, what they'll do is if it's not working, they blame the patient. What they'll say is, well, you're not compliant, right? And they really use that. They use that Orwellian terminology. You're not compliant, right? If you just do what we tell you, then it'll be fine. But your problem is you're a disobedient little wretch and you're not doing what we tell you. You're not accepting the dogma. How dare you? Right.
mhm.
Um, and when you try and explain things to the doctors, they don't really listen. Right. You come in, you sit there and wait for however long. They never tell you. Right. And then some bureaucrat calls you. You get 7.5 minutes on average with the doctor. That's the national average. Right. And the first part of it is they're asking a series of close-ended questions, which are just intended to have the doctor put checks in boxes. You get like maybe 2 minutes to actually explain what's going on. And the doctor's not really listening to you. He's trying to fit you into a box, whatever that box is. Right. As opposed to when I go and see like my naturopathic doctor, my acupuncturist for the first time, you don't wait for them. They wait for you. It's not an Orwellian environment. You go into these doctors' offices and I get PTSD immediately. It's like walking into a prison. It's just the most oppressive Orwellian environment you could possibly imagine, right? You're treated like cattle. Okay. When I go to see my natural doctor or acupuncturist, the office actually feels comfortable. Psychologically, it's a comfortable place to be and they work to make it as such. They wait for me. I don't sit there and wait for some bureaucrat to call me. They wait for me. And the first time we spend probably an hour and a half where I sit there and talk to the doctor. They actually listen, right? You don't have to repeat yourself. They actually listen, record all the things and try and think about, okay, what's actually going on here? Let you talk and I'm actually going to listen. I'm going to think big picture, try and figure out what's going on. So whether they can help you or not, at least it's a more pleasant experience, right? I think it's good
Totally.
for your mental health, right? I know it was good for my mental health because when I would see these alternative providers, even if they couldn't help me, I felt like at least they're listening and they're trying to help. And nobody else is. Nobody else is. Everybody else, I got to fight them. I got to fight through the bureaucrats who are there to run interference for the doctor. Because the last thing the doctors want to do is actually deal with a patient, right? All their
Mhm.
time is spent working with the insurance companies to make sure they get paid the maximum, right? So, so yeah. So again, it's not to say that like naturopathic doctors are the greatest thing and they're solve all your problems. No, it's not black and white like that. Okay. But they are under a different incentive structure and they approach things from a different perspective. In my experience has been one of the litmus tests you can do to see if you're working with a good doctor is just tell them, hey, by the way, I'm working with a naturopathic doctor and I'm taking these natural supplements and just see how they respond. Many
Mm.
of them will immediately start lecturing you and cautioning you, like, whoa, that's
So true.
unregulated. You don't want to be dealing with those witch doctors. Like, how dare you?
Uh-huh.
Right? If your doctor responds that way, you probably want to look for another doctor. You're dealing with someone who's very dogmatic, who's very threatened by new ideas, and who is unwilling to work with other people. Okay. You don't want that. On the other hand, if the doctor responds positively, is, oh, great. I'm glad that's helping you. Good. Great. That's probably a good doctor. Right.
Yep.
That's the other thing I found about working with my naturopathic doctor is I take her referrals very seriously. When an MD refers you to another MD, it's meaningless. Okay. When a naturopathic doctor refers me to someone, I know I'm now dealing with an MD, a doctor who's open to alternatives and who's willing to work with a naturopathic doctor. And they tend to be better doctors. And by the way, I think, to be honest, the same thing applies on the natural side. If you work, because I have met with some like natural doctors and acupuncturists where they're just like totally negative against the standard Western medicine. And if that's their attitude, they're probably not good either, right? You want someone who's willing to work all avenues, right? There's a place for drugs. There's a place for standard conventional Western medicine, right? You know, my natural doctor could not fix my heart attack, right? That wouldn't be very helpful, right? Couldn't do surgery, right? So definitely there's a place. There's a place. I know I'm rambling here. The other thing I wanted to mention before I forget is I always bring up health sharing as an alternative to health insurance.
Mhm.
That's so I use CrowdHealth. I always have my link in the description below. If you want to check it out, please do. I have both. I have both standard health insurance and I have health sharing, and both can be helpful, right? This way, I feel like I'm not as limited. I have options. If there's
Yeah.
stuff that health insurance won't cover, health sharing is a lot better for those. First of all, with your health sharing plan, I use CrowdHealth. There are others. You're not dealing with bureaucrats. So they actually assign you a healthcare advocate. It's the same person. They know who you are, they know your situation. You can get on their calendar anytime you want, and you can actually have an open conversation, right? You're not dealing with a bureaucrat. So with some of the stuff I was dealing with, I was actually talking to the director of operations who talked to the CEO of that
Mm.
particular company. You're never going to get access to the CEO of your standard health insurance company. That's
Yep.
ridiculous. No, you're dealing with a bureaucrat. That's who you're dealing with, right? So at least there's more options. There are open lines of communication. It's a more pleasant experience. And I think especially if you're healthy, health sharing is a no brainer. If you're not healthy, then you have to examine it a bit more closely because one of the reasons why health sharing is so affordable is there are limits to how much they'll fund pre-existing conditions, right? Which makes sense. They're not an
Mhm.
insurance company,
It's
but my
actual yeah.
they operate more like a real insurance company in that if you have pre-existing conditions, there are limits there, right? They can't that wouldn't make any
Well,
sense economically, right?
I think it's important to also understand the pre-existing condition thing is a relatively new concept where insurance companies are no longer taking notice of them and they can't deny you coverage for pre-existing condition when you buy your own insurance. That was pretty much brought to the table with Obamacare. Before Obamacare, and I remember that being a huge part of his put was, hey, you're never going to be declined because of a pre-existing condition. And so it's a lot of people flock to that like it was this like amazing gift. And it's people like me and you are just like, we see where this is going and it's not good. And it's really there may be some people that benefit in the short run that were able to get coverage that never would have had coverage. And there's plenty of people that will make that argument. But I'll make the argument that from a society perspective, there's a lot more problems that are created that impact millions of lives, then
Yeah. Yeah. Because the question is, because again,
yeah,
we always have to go back to root cause analysis and why.
yep,
The question asked is, well, why is healthcare so ridiculously expensive? Right.
totally.
if we really answer that question and solve it, then you find that, well, health insurance is not necessary once you solve that problem. The reason
Yep.
why health so-called insurance is necessary is because of the obscene prices. Okay. And that's a whole other topic. But yeah, so I would definitely, I think you need to look into health sharing, right? At least look into it,
Yeah.
whether you do it or not. You need to know what your options are,
Hmm.
right? So look into it. Unfortunately, most people will never even look into it, which is sad. And then they don't, and then something happens. Now it's too late, right? I wish I'd known about these options before. Yeah, getting back to my story. So I was dealing with sleep apnea. I was seeing sleep apnea doctors. I was trying CPAP. It was horrible, absolutely miserable experience. Nothing worked. The doctors were not helpful at all. And I saw multiple of them, right? They didn't help at all. They just bullied me. Basically told me, yeah, you got sleep apnea and you need to just try harder with CPAP, right? Basically, right? And there's always something else, some other thing they can throw. Well, try this or try that or try this. So it's always throw stuff
Sure.
against the wall and see what sticks. It's never, let's try and figure out what's actually the root cause and fix that. Okay. And so everything that I found that actually helped with my sleep issues, it was always something that I figured out on my own. It was never something that a doctor told me. So I had tried a lot of different things. I was trying everything that I could. And of course, I'm not trying everything I could because I'm so mentally and physically exhausted all the time. And I have all the
Hmm.
PTSD now associated with all this that it's really hard to even think about it. Right. So we're like, if you have like mountains of debt piling up, like you can't even think about it. Like you don't even want to think about it. Right. So again, understand that when you go through something like this, you're not going to be in a position to make good decisions. Right. Life does not exist on a spreadsheet. So you need to account for that when you're making plans in advance, right? So it wasn't until so I had been seeing this natural doctor. Okay. Yeah. Again, she actually listened. She thought about it. And most importantly, she actually did research. She actually tried to figure things out. Most doctors don't do that. They give you the pat answer right then and there, or they give you a pat answer after your blood work comes back. They don't do research. They don't think about it. They don't sit and strategize about it like you and I would do when we get someone who comes into us, right? We don't have a pat solution. We actually sit and think about and
I hope not.
strategize. What's
Okay.
the best solution for this person? Let me think about it. Let me sleep on it. And I'll come up with something because I actually care about my clients. I actually want to help them. I'm not just giving them a pat solution. Okay.
Right.
So she did that. And one of the things that I had always told all my doctors was about the time my sleep issues started appearing, I had gotten into a car accident and I had some minor neck pain from that. And I don't think that's related, but I just want to bring it up because it's possible, just given the timing, right?
Mhm.
Okay. And of course, they ignored it. What are they going to do? Right. My natural doctor actually listened, took that, thought about it, researched it. And she said, this is after a while of working with her. This wasn't overnight. This was like after months. Okay. She said, I think you have a phrenic nerve issue. I was like, what the heck is a phrenic nerve? I've never heard of that. Probably most doctors don't even know what it is, honestly. And I was a little annoyed. I was like, yeah, whatever. Where's that come from? And she said,
Yeah.
but then she said, you should get a diaphragmatic ultrasound. By the way, this was through email, through patient portal. That's the other thing about my natural doctor. I can actually get a hold of her. I
Mm.
can actually communicate with her, right? Like I send her a message through the patient portal. She responds the very next day, usually same day, right? It's not, oh, schedule an appointment 3 weeks out, wait for 45 minutes. I'll talk to you for 7 minutes, right? I can actually get a hold of her. There's no bureaucrat standing between me and her. Okay. So I
Yep.
want to give her props, Dr. Sarah Giardenelli. I'll include a link to her below. There are others. She's really good. She helped me. So I hope I send her a lot of business. So she said, you should get a diaphragmatic ultrasound done. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Maybe it's a diaphragm issue. Because I had always told my doctors, right? I had an intuitive sense that no, it's not a blockage. I don't think it's a blockage. I think it's a weakness in my breathing. Like I'm not breathing strong enough, right? I had an intuitive sense of that, right?
Yeah.
So it's another thing. The older I get, the less stock I put in reason, logic, numbers, spreadsheets. I don't care.
Yep.
Intuition, instinct, and intuition. All the best decisions of my life have been based on my intuition. And when I trust numbers and spreadsheets over my intuition, it always ends up bad. It always ends up bad. So don't let the doctors intimidate you into not trusting your instincts and your intuition. I had an intuition. I know my body better than my doctors do. That something else was going on. And I thankfully did not let the doctors bully me into because some of them were basically bullies, lectures. Let's be honest, okay? Let's just be honest about who these people really are. Okay. Now, some of them are great. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but at the very least, even the good ones they know are working within a system that is not designed to benefit the patient. So they have to fight the system to do what's best for their patients, which is why many of them are just saying, you know what, I'm done with insurance. I'm not taking it anymore. I'll just take cash, right? I don't want to be limited by the insurance. Okay. That's the other thing about health sharing, by the way. Health sharing is so many people are just focused on what does it cost. As Chris Kirkpatrick would say, stop thinking like a poor person and ask what it costs. Even if health sharing costs more, you
Yeah.
should still do it because it's going to dramatically improve your relationships with your doctors. Because now you're coming in as a cash patient, which means the doctor is no longer limited by what the insurance company tells him. He can actually give you his honest opinion. He can tell you whatever treatment he wants, whether insurance is going to cover it or not. So you'll
Mhm.
find better doctors and you'll have a better relationship with them. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So I went to get a diaphragmatic ultrasound done. Well, the radiologist didn't know what diaphragmatic ultrasound was. They did the wrong thing. I had to deal with them. So here's the natural doctor who is not a radiologist having to lecture the radiologist on their own supposed specialty.
Wow.
Okay. Turns out none of them could do it. So I finally got scheduled for a fluoroscopic sniff test, which is not as good as a diaphragmatic ultrasound, but it's similar in that it shows how the diaphragm is working. Right? So I
Okay.
got a fluoroscopic sniff test, which revealed that the right side of my diaphragm was paralyzed, probably due to phrenic nerve palsy, which basically means the phrenic nerve, I think you have two phrenic nerves. They come down from your neck and
Okay.
they control breathing. They control the diaphragms. Okay. The radiologist there was, I won't say the words I would like to use to describe him, but he was very casual in informing me that, yeah, it's totally asymptomatic and there's nothing that can be done for it. Right. So you're basically telling me there's no hope and you're delivering that message with a smile on your face. What kind of a sociopath are you? What kind of sociopaths do you have to be? Right. Same thing with my cardiologist. I've tried different cardiologists. And by the way, I always get different opinions as to what the right treatment should be. So
Mhm.
even within the medical cartel, there, guess what? Experts disagree. You can get a second opinion.
Go figure.
And this cardiologist is always like smiley, happy, nicey. I'm like, dude, I'm dealing with a life threatening situation. And you're all smiley, happy, nicey. What is wrong with you? What is
Mm.
wrong? These people have no professionalism. They have no compassion, no sympathy for their patients whatsoever because they don't work for you. Chris, imagine if you were delivering a death benefit check to some poor widow and you came in acting that way. Hey, how's everyone doing? Oh, great to see you.
Yeah, no, man,
How the F do you think I'm doing? Come on.
I know,
That's
I know.
the best you'll get is more of like a disinterested bureaucrat where they're just kind of, yeah, I'll get them in, get them out, right? Kind of bored. I don't care. Right. But the worst ones are like the fakey, nicey ones. Anyway, but that's just reiterating what I'm saying before, which is that the number one thing I notice among these people is how they have zero compassion for their patients. It's all trained, worked out of them, right? No compassion. Whereas my natural doctor and my acupuncturist was not able to help me, but you know what she had? She had intuition and she had compassion, right? Like she could intuit things on more than one occasion. There was something that had changed with my health that I had forgotten to tell her. And she intuited it. She noticed it when she was doing her thing. She's think something different. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you. I got off that drug. She's like, oh, okay. She could intuit things because when you're good at something, you develop a sense of intuition,
Yeah.
right? And she was genuinely frustrated when I was not getting better and when things kept getting worse. And I'm like, at least she freaking cares, right? At least she freaking cares. These other people, they don't care. Okay, and I know I'm getting emotional here, but I have permission to get emotional and call people names because when you've been through what I've been through, you have permission to vent a little bit.
Totally.
I had a client who vented to me too about how the medical cartel killed his father-in-law because they denied him the drugs that he needed. And he happened to be an attorney. He went and filed an injunction to get it and he got it, but it
Mhm.
was too late. So is that doctor going to jail for killing his father-in-law? Of course not. These guys don't ever accept responsibility for anything. So so killing people is their job, right? So finally I was able to, thankfully, I did not accept what that guy told me. Oh, it's totally asymptomatic. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm just imagining all this stuff going on. I guess I'm just imagining the fact that I'm waking up in the middle of the night and I can't get sleep and my energy is super low and all this other stuff going on with my digestion. I guess I'm just imagining that, must be my imagination. And there's no hope. There's no hope. There's nothing we can do. Like, that's what he told me.
Mm.
So I went and told my natural doctor that. Thankfully, she didn't accept that. And guess what she did? She did some research and she said, "Hey, I found this like Avery device that's kind of like a pacemaker, except for
Mm.
your diaphragm, not for your heart. Why don't you go through their website and see if you can get hold of them and see if they can help you?" Like, okay.
Mm.
So I went through their website. A few days later, someone actually got in contact and he said, "Yeah, we've had some success with this. It's a specialized surgery where we can install this and help you out. And let me introduce you to Dr. Matthew Kaufman. He's really the number one specialist in this field
Mm.
and get you, and I'll introduce you. If you come through us, we can get you in the calendar faster." Right. So I got hooked up with Dr. Matthew Kaufman, who's basically the world's number one specialist in phrenic nerve. He's really the only one. There's no one else like him in the world. And I did a telehealth appointment with him. And for the first time ever, I felt like someone was asking me the right question,
Mm.
right? Without me telling him, he was like, "Did you get in a car accident and suffer some trauma?" And I was like, "Yes, I did." It wasn't major. Like it wasn't a big deal. So I didn't think about it. I still have
Didn't
neck
feel like a big
pain.
deal in the moment.
Yeah, it didn't feel like a big deal, but that was
Yeah.
about the time my sleep issues started working. I mean, he's like, "Yeah, I don't think you have sleep apnea. I think you have sleep disordered breathing as a result of the right side of your diaphragm being paralyzed." And I was like, "Yeah, that makes total sense. That fits in completely with what I've been thinking this whole time." Right.
Mm.
And he's like, "Yes, there are options." Right. The pulmonologists don't know about it because that's who you usually get referred to if you have diaphragm issues. Or they'll do what's called diaphragm plication, which is the rough equivalent of hacking off a limb. It's one of these things where medical malpractice is basically standard practice, right? Most of them don't know it. And so that's what they do if they decide to try and help. Anyway, so he said, "Yeah, and I don't think the Avery device is right for you." He said, "Based on what you're telling me, I think we can do what's called phrenic nerve reconstruction, which is a surgery that
Yeah.
he had pioneered, and he's the only one in the world who does it. And nobody knows it exists." So again, when your doctor tells you something, oftentimes you can find out he's wrong just with a simple Google search. It really
Mm.
is, I'm not joking at all. For all
What's
their
that?
credentials and everything, they're basically part of a religious cult and they have their dogma. And the dogma is not questioned. You will not question the dogma. If you question the dogma, you get punished, right?
Don't forget they call it practicing medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and so basically he explained to me there's multiple levels. He's like, it depends how bad the nerve damage is and how your diaphragm is functioning, right? In the best case scenario, we can do phrenic nerve reconstruction, where if there's enough nerve signal, we basically borrow a nerve from your ankle and we graft it onto the phrenic nerve. And then through several months of therapy, your body rewires itself and learns to use this new fully functional nerve, right?
It's
And
crazy.
repairs the signal, right? And it takes time. It's not a quick,
Sure.
easy fix because your diaphragm hasn't been used right in a while. It has to get strengthened. It has to get stronger.
It
So
atrophied your
yeah, you
diaphragm.
gotta do a very specialized form
Yeah.
of therapy known as posture therapy or diaphragm retraining, right?
Mm.
It's not respiratory therapy, it's something different, right?
Mm.
And he's like, "I'm trying to educate the medical establishment on this because most of them don't know this, right?" So anyway,
Mm.
so then they went up there. So then the doctor he referred me to, Dr. David Brown, we actually did an EMG NCV and diaphragmatic ultrasound, right? So the EMG NCV basically measures the nerve signal, sees how much is,
Mhm.
and then the diaphragmatic ultrasound is a much better test than the fluoroscopic sniff test because they can actually see your diaphragm. So they're watching it on the screen and they're taking measurements to see how's it doing. And so they basically confirm what we already knew. And when I first talked to Dr. Kaufman, he was a little worried because he's like, "Yeah, it's been a long time since your car accident. We may not be able to do a whole lot. We'll see how much nerve signal is left." Right.
Mm.
Thankfully, when they ran the test, they found out, yeah, it's not opening properly and your nerve is not working properly, but there's enough signal there where we can reconstruct it. And then I went through the whole nightmare of trying to get this funded through health sharing, through health insurance. And I won't bore you with the details of that, but I learned a lot from that, of course, as I always do. And it was brutal. It was absolutely brutal. But I was in a little better space mentally because I was like, okay, for the first time in years, This won't explain the heart attack. This won't explain all the issues that went back to 2010. But
Yeah.
I feel like I've got something that actually fits the fact pattern. We have a root cause analysis in a treatment that might actually work. So in the worst case scenario, if I have to pay for this out of pocket,
Hmm.
that would hurt. But you know what? That's better than the options I had before, right? That's better than the options I had. So long story short, through a series of fortuitous events, I made a really good health insurance agent, was able to get onto a different health insurance plan that I couldn't have gotten access to myself. And that covered it. So that insurance plan actually did cover the
Nice.
surgery, right? The
Nice.
cash price all told between the surgery, hospital, everything else would have been $100,000. And of course, that's the cash price. So we know the insurance price is going to
Insurance
be
paid more.
high,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny, even that, like dealing with the hospital, because first I tried to go through health sharing. They decided they were not going to fund it because it was a pre existing condition. Honestly, I wasn't happy with how they handled it, but at least I could do work, talk to a human being. And it was things like I
Mm.
told the hospital, hey, in order for my health sharing plan to office, I need a good faith estimate, right? And I need it in writing. They're like, yeah, we can't do, right? So you come in, they can't even tell
Crazy.
you what it's going to cost. And so then if that's where my health sharing plan did help me,
Well,
they brought in their partner and said, actually, that's illegal. It's illegal for them not to give you a good faith estimate in advance. But hospitals are bullies. They know they can get away with it, right? So they know they can get away with it, right?
well,
So that's where the health
they
sharing
have
plan
better
did help,
attorneys than you.
right? You have someone advocating for you, right? You have
Yep.
someone advocating for you. So they brought in their partner, said, no, give us the good faith estimate, right? We got it, right? That kind of a thing. That's another way that health sharing can help you is, again, you feel like you actually have someone who's advocating for you, right?
Mm.
Rather
Yep.
than being alone fighting this massive, powerful, evil bureaucracy, you actually have someone advocating for you. And you become a much more informed patient, not only about health issues, but about how to navigate the bureaucracy, because that's a whole skill in itself, right? And you really need like a spouse, a friend, a sibling, like someone who can help you psychologically get through it because it is really lonely and you feel very powerless because you're dealing with institutions much more powerful than you. And especially in my case, you don't even know what's going on, right? So if I had had a really good disability policy, because by the way, I had to walk away from a full-time job, like I was not able to function, right? I mean,
Mm.
I've been running this business with both hands tied behind my back because I've been struggling with all these health issues. And I can't put nearly as much mental energy into it as I would normally do. If I
Mhm.
had had a really good disability policy, I don't think it would have helped me because I wouldn't have had a real diagnosis. That was the challenge, right? Any insurance company is going to say, okay, you say you're disabled. Well, we need a
Well,
diagnosis showing that, right? And I had no diagnosis. No one could figure out what was wrong, right? The diagnoses they had were basically code for there's nothing wrong with you or we can't figure out what's wrong with you, right?
yeah.
So thankfully, I went with Dr. Matthew Kaufman. I got the phrenic nerve reconstruction surgery done. I'm still going through the therapy. It's not a quick, easy road back. That's kind of where I'm at now. There's still a whole host of other issues that this did not explain. But what this could do, if that can fix the breathing issue, which then fixes the sleep issues, that'll put me in a much better place, right? Those of you
Mhm.
who don't struggle with sleep issues, and by this, I don't mean insomnia. I don't mean struggling to fall asleep. I mean physical sleep issue where you cannot get the deep REM sleep that you need. Really have no clue what this is like and
Hard.
how it makes you basically a zombie and a non-functional human being, right?
Mhm.
It's not the same as not getting enough sleep. Probably everyone's had that experience. This is qualitatively different, right? Imagine if, because it's cumulative for multiple years in a row, you are not getting REM sleep. You are not getting deep sleep, right? It's hard to explain what that does to your level of mental and emotional capacity, right?
For sure, man.
So,
Let me ask you this, because there's something I think it's important to share in your story is just, all right, so all this stuff happened to you and sucks that it happened. Like I said, you started off by talking about, hey, I'm going to talk about really doesn't have much to do with what I do, when in fact it has everything to do with what you do. Because, like, at the end of the day, if you had at that point in time I guess it's tough because you actually it wouldn't have been diagnosed. You wouldn't have been able to use a living benefit for it. You wouldn't have been able to you
No.
weren't diagnosed with anything significant. But if you had if you at
So
least
a
like
critical illness benefit absolutely would
yeah,
have helped because
critical illness would have
I
covered it.
did have the heart attack.
Yeah.
You can have through a whole life policy, some of them have a
Yeah.
critical illness rider where you can advance yourself a portion of that death benefit in the event of a critical illness, and a heart attack absolutely does qualify. I also love standalone critical illness policies that I have clients that have gotten into where they give you a lump sum benefit amount up to $500,000. It just depends what you sign up for,
Mhm.
right? And these are real insurance policies, meaning there's no wrangling with the insurance company about, oh, we don't cover that. And that's not acceptable. And that's not approved. It's no, you had the heart attack. Here's your money. It's
Yeah.
indemnity. Very straightforward. There's no wrangling.
Mhm.
So it's a real insurance policy, meaning they underwrite you. So they're going to make sure you're healthy before they give it to you. And they'll go pretty deep.
Yeah.
I've had more than once clients discover things that they didn't even know because their doctor ran a test and told them, yeah, everything's fine. The underwriters looked at it and they're like, no, everything's not fine.
Right.
We're not covering you because of this. And you're like, what? My doctor didn't even tell me that. It's like, yeah, your doctor probably didn't even read it. He may have read like the summary, but underwriters are smarter than your doctor, right? They're going to look in and find out, nope, there was something precancerous there. We're not covering you for cancer. So my doctor told me everything was fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, your doctor, he doesn't work for your best interests. Yeah. The
So
underwriters do a better job than your doctor at looking
oh,
at your
for
medical.
sure. It's funny you say that. I went through this. I just got more insurance. And I'm not gonna say what it was, but, like, I had a little medical thing happening. Wasn't it ended up not being a medical thing, but our bodies are weird. Sometimes you feel a little something some places, and you're like, "Ah, I don't know what that is." Whatever. And so, rather than go to my doctor and be like, "Whatever," I'm like, "I'm just gonna apply for more insurance because they're gonna help do a full run over, and they'll figure it out before any
Mhm.
doctor is gonna figure it out." You know what I mean? Like, with all the
Mhm.
things that they do.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so that was funny.
They
But the
have the right financial incentives. Your doctor is not. Your
right,
doctor is not
exactly.
financially incentivized to help you. He gets paid no matter what the
Totally.
results. He
Yep,
gets paid no matter what the
yep,
results. Whereas the
yep.
underwriters for the insurance company have a financial incentive to underwrite you properly. So it's
Mhm.
not uncommon that they discover things that your doctor missed.
No, for sure.
The other thing you'll see too is that so many insurance applications take forever, not because of the
Mhm.
insurance company, but because the doctor's office.
When
And it's they're calling him every day. Hey, we need you to send over the Chris Kirkpatrick's medical records. Hey, we
oh
need you
my
to fax
gosh,
this over. And they have
totally.
no incentive to do anything. The bureaucrats, they answer the phone when they
Yep.
feel like it. They send it over when they feel like it. I'm telling my guy, hey, look, I can't do anything. Neither can the insurance company. Call your doctor. Like one of my clients is a doctor. She is
Mhm.
an MD and she can't get the doctor's office moving.
Oh,
And it's like,
frustrating.
2 weeks, like, come on, just send
Yep.
over the forms, right?
I met a guy who was an RVP, a regional vice president for one of the well-known participating mutual life insurance companies, and he was there, and I met him at this, like, home office meeting kinda deal, and he was telling me this story when he joined because he left a different company and joined this company, and when he joined, they wanted to get a key person policy on him. And so they went through and they started going through the underwriting and in that process discovered he had cancer.
Wow.
And that's how we found out was going through that process. Even though he'd been to the doctor, I was like, "Do you do your checkups? Do you do that?" He's like, "Dude, I went to the doctor twice a year, every year." And it took going through underwriting for life insurance to be discovered. And so I guess like I got a couple minutes left. I want to ask you this is like land the plane with me for what do you wish you knew before? What do you wish if you could get in a DeLorean with Michael J. Fox and go back to at the beginning, what are the things you would tell yourself knowing that there are always going to be certain limitations and there's not a perfect scenario or
Yeah,
whatever? People that
protected
are
my
going
ins
through what you're going through.
I wish I had protected my insurability
Yeah.
across the board. So get myself fully insured to what I was eligible for at the time with life insurance, with a convertible term policy with a good mutual company, whether I'm ready to convert it to whole life or not. Same thing with disability, same thing with critical illness, right?
Yeah.
Lock in your rate now while you're still young and healthy, and that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Um,
Yeah.
it's going to make your life psychologically a lot easier. I also wish, and I had started to some extent, but I wish I had taken the time to really develop a good relationship with someone outside the medical cartel. naturopathic doctor, homeopathic doctor, whatever. Take the time. It will take you some time to find one, and that's okay. I remember when I was like getting myself on healthier foods and getting outside of the grocery store and going to the farmer's market. It took me the better part of a year to find the right sources. But once I did, you know the doctor, or sorry, the farmer, you trust him, you know it's good, and you understand all that stuff. But it took time. Same thing here. Invest the time and effort to get a good relationship with, I would say, a naturopathic doctor, but it doesn't have to be that. Just someone who you feel really has your best interests at heart, thinks outside the box, is going to help
Yeah.
you, right?
Yeah.
So you develop that relationship because when stuff happens, you're not going to be in a good mental state to develop that relationship then and there. You're going to be in panic, right? And you're not going to know what to do or who to turn to. And it's going to be really tough to figure that stuff out then. And I'll repeat what DeAndre Clayton said. Don't treat this like it's an if. It's a when. It's a when.
True.
At some point between now and the day you die, it's incredibly likely you're going to have something like cancer, heart attack, stroke, long-term care. Take your pick, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
would you rather buy
Totally.
coverage for that when you're a healthy 25-year-old or when you're a sick 80-year-old, right? Like do it while it's cheap, while it's dirt cheap, right? And by the way, if you're watching this, no matter how old and sick you are, there are still options, right? The best
Mm-hmm.
options may be off the table, but there are still options to
Still options.
make the most efficient use of your capital. So this is
Yep.
why I'm a huge believer of protecting your insurability. And I'll tell you a little story. I applied for life insurance with an agent who's with a well-known insurance agency. Okay. And we had everything approved. And he said, "Oh, but there's this one thing we need to change." And I was like, "Okay, but it's approved, right? We're done." He said, "Yeah, it's approved." I'm like, "Okay, let's make that change." Guess what happened? And you being an agent, you can guess what happened. Insurance company came back and said, "Nope, declined. We're not doing it." And that guy screwed me. He completely ruined me. So now what I do is forget about whole life. Okay. We're taking out a convertible term policy
Mm-hmm.
for your full human life value and your spouse and whoever
And then
else.
we'll.
And we're doing it now.
Yep.
Do not pass go. Do not collect $200.
Yep.
Get that locked in. And
Yep.
I don't care what we do in the future. We're getting that in place
Totally.
first. We're
Yep.
protecting your insurability. If I had known
Yep.
that, I would have been in much better shape. It's like, okay, now we've got that in place. Now we can breathe a sigh of relief. We've protected your insurability. Everything's
Mm-hmm.
good. And
Yeah.
now, to your point, we have control. Now we can
Mm-hmm.
decide, okay, do we want a whole life policy? How large do we want it? Now we have options, right? Whether you take out a whole life policy or believe in infinite banking or not, you'll have options. You'll have options, right? I'm sure, Chris, we could
Oh,
tell a ton of stories about people who wanted to do this, took some time thinking about it. By the time they were ready, guess what? This paying a premium into a whole life policy is a privilege. It is not a right.
yep.
This is another reason why I don't believe in short pay policies.
Yep.
Okay. I don't believe in short pay policies. Peter Nelson and I talked about that too. It is a privilege to pay a premium in a whole life policy, and that whole life policy gets better every single year it's in force. So you want to secure that privilege for the longest time frame possible.
Mm-hmm.
Premium payment is not a liability. It's a privilege. You don't want to pay the policy up in 5 years. You don't want to pay it up in 7 years. You want to pay it up when you're dead. Okay. And until then, you want to pay the highest possible premium for the
You
longest
can afford.
possible time frame. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
But you got to get over
Love it.
viewing the premium payment like it's a liability. You got to get over that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole video series on its own, and I'm sure we could do more videos on all that stuff, but
This is part one. We got more to talk about. I
yeah.
know you got to run, Chris, but more to talk about. And Chris, I know, has some stories too. So we want to hear from him as well. And by the way, let me know in the comments, email me, call me, let me know. Is this helpful to you or is this just me talking about myself and you'd rather me stick to infinite banking? Let me know. I'd like to know. I take your opinion seriously and I want to do something that's valuable, not for me, but for the audience. So let me know. Is this helpful
For
or not?
for what it's worth, I didn't talk a whole lot, but I thought it was good. I don't know that I would have said all that because I don't have the experience, so I couldn't communicate a lot of it all, even though hearing it, I'm like, "It makes sense." And so there's an element of it where I think I know it's stretching yourself and it's not your norm to do that, but I applaud you for doing it because there's a lot of people that need to see that. And I think I believe we're put through experiences to share those experiences. And I think a lot of the pain in this world, whether it's addiction or whether it's other issues is because of the fact that people just don't talk. They're not vulnerable enough. They're not going to share their issues and they want to act they're bulletproof. And think about from a parenting style perspective, like how many, like my parents' generation never shared anything with me, like about what's going on. It's like, wow, if they would have just shared some stuff, like life could have been a lot easier. You know what I mean? They don't, like, I think the fact that you're willing to be vulnerable, the fact that you're willing to share, I think it's going to help people. So I would argue, guys, anybody that says he shouldn't share it, I don't know what to say. I'm just throwing my 2 cents out there. But if there's a chance that what you're saying can help one person in the future, you should never take it down. That's my perspective.
Yeah, I would caution people. I'd be careful. I think discretion is a virtue,
Sure.
and no help, bad help is worse than no help at all. So that's maybe
Sure.
we can talk about that next time because
Yeah, yeah, let's do it.
I would caution against what you're saying.
Okay.
Um,
That's
you
fair.
don't want to expose vulnerability to the wrong people. Absolutely not. Especially with some of the stuff I've dealt with. I regret exposing some things to some people. You got to be careful. So I would
That's fair.
nuance. I mean, yes, communication. Yes,
Yep. Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
But what that means is more nuanced. So I
Yep.
wouldn't just,
That's fair. That's fair. Well, let's get into it more next time. Let's get
yeah,
into it more
yeah.
next
Thanks for
time.
your
That'll be
time, Chris.
awesome.
We'll talk more
Thanks, man.
next time. Thanks,
All right, brother.
everyone. God bless. We'll talk again soon.
Yeah.